Welcome back to our Mastering Our Relationships Sacred Self-Healing Workshop series. This is part 5 of our series. So if you have not watched the previous workshops, this may be a little of a deep dive for you here out of nowhere. We are covering the complex aspects of relationships here, and already had a pretty cool journey through all the different aspects, the hopes and dreams of relationships, the greater goals, the karmic purpose, attachment styles. We learned about codependency. We learned about toxicity in relationships, different emotional manipulation tactics, and also some of the aspects that come with our own fantasy, our own inability to discern. We have one more part left in which we will discuss the aspects of intimacy and how we can ensure to build more fruitful and lasting relationships that actually lead to happiness and true love. But in this workshop, we want to cover the depths of toxicity with the example of narcissism in relationships. I called this the depths of toxicity because when we deal with narcissism, we are looking at basically mental health issues, psychopathy. We're looking at issues that are not necessarily, let's say, healthy to begin with. Yeah, the same could be said about addiction, not just substance abuse, but also behavioral addictions. And that's why it's not really a surprise that we're also revisiting the codependency realm here in conjunction with narcissism, because there's a lot of crossovers with addiction and co-addiction when it comes to the effects of narcissism in relationships. We'll briefly cover narcissistic parents and how this can condition us, how it can set us up for certain types of relationships, and then dive deeper into the merging and fusion problem that occurs in relationships with high levels of narcissism and narcissistic traits. We go into the energetic aspect of the virtual reality, the matrix that is being formed in narcissistic relationships, the shared fantasy. And we will also hopefully have enough time to discuss the empath narcissist attraction. And as always, you were able to send in some questions ahead of time. I want to thank all of you for sending in those questions. All very cool questions, so we're going to discuss them as well. And I want to point out that when you go to the forum for the Sacred Self-Healing community, the link is at transcodes.com, right up on the upper right hand corner. Then you will see that there is a section here, Sacred Self-Healing Training, Video Archive, Workshop Training Videos. And here we have various topics that we have done workshops with in the last 10 years. You can find them listed here. And if you go to the empath narcissist trauma aspects, you will find already 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 really valuable recordings in there that explain some of these aspects that I will talk about today in short form in a deeper way. Okay, there's also lots of other topics here. For example, when it comes to narcissistic parents, you want to maybe look into karmic family, inner child aspects. There's a bunch of relationship aspects here. So you will find various in-depth workshops here for all these topics. So obviously we won't be able to cover all of these here today. In this part 5, we will dive exclusively into the narcissistic aspect in relationships. So let's get started. Let's get started with this picture here. It's a picture that I've created for the Sacred Self-Healing course. It shows the difference from an energetic point of view of a relationship between two people that is based on either solar plexus, which comes here. You can see this third chakra energy, the bonding that occurs there, versus a relationship that is based on the heart chakra bonding, the true self-love. Okay, so third chakra love, fourth chakra love. If you're not familiar with those energetic terms, then go back to your steps. There's lots of material in step 9, step 17 and 18 about this. But if you look at all these traits that come with these different kinds of love relationships, then you probably want to say, okay, one is sort of the bad kind of relationship and the other is the good kind of relationship. But here within this sacred self-healing context, we want to know, how can we get from one to the other? Now, most of us have probably experienced solar plexus love in our life, which is quite common because it's part of our developmental stage. So once we grow out of this, sort of unconditional love space that our parents, our primary caregivers, are supposed to provide for us, we go out into this world and, sort of try to fill in that void. So we're trying to bond with someone, we're trying to create a relationship that can simulate this unconditional love that we were supposed to experience when we grew up. The problem with that is that some of us, maybe many of us, maybe most of us, haven't really experienced this safe space, this unconditional space with our parents. And yet we will, this is psychology, go out and try to simulate this space, this infantile love space with our partners. And you can already tell where this is going. There we have the first problem. If the way we were introduced to love wasn't really in a, say, heart-based way, or it's not that parents don't love their children, guys, don't get me wrong here, but obviously parents are humans that have limitations as well. So we will all have experienced some levels of insufficient love or care. But some of us will have experienced more than that, neglect, abuse, and abandonment. And when that is the case, a bunch of things happen in you, in order to cope with that. And that's kind of like where we want to start here with this whole discussion with narcissism, because it's directly linked to how we were introduced to love, and also how or what kind of role models we had and how we experienced the space. So ideally, we want to experience love as a mutual exchange. It says here energy exchange, but that's just because we're obviously also looking at the energetic component of this. So we don't just want to look at this from a psychological point of view. And in this sort of ideal love space, this ideal sort of unconditional space, we are feeling centered. We want to know our own energy. We want to fully inhabit our own space, our own identity. We can be fully present. Yeah, we don't really need anything from others because we understand that we have all that we need within ourselves. We are the subject of our love, not in a narcissistic way, but in the sense that we don't actually require an object of love to fill in this void. We can feel and listen to ourselves and to others. We can empathize without needing to sympathize, meaning we can be present for someone, we can listen to their needs, we can walk in their shoes without absorbing what it is that the energy that they're putting out there. We can feel when somebody or something, a place or relationship is toxic for us. We have good boundaries. We can recognize when those boundaries or our values, when our beliefs, when they are violated or compromised. We have no problem with saying no, and we know when it's time to leave. You know, respect and have no problem with boundaries. You know the difference between theirs and yours. You can decide whom you want to interact with, because love or relationship is a choice, it's a conscious choice. And you can offer your love, your intimacy, and your commitment freely to others. That's the ideal, guys. This is what it's supposed to be like when you're whole and when you are in your heart. The reality of this is that most of us aren't. We aren't to begin with. And so this centeredness, where we can really feel the center of our own center, know how to ground ourselves, know how to clear ourselves, and know how to maintain our own space and our boundaries, somewhere along the way got violated, and that made us susceptible. It made us susceptible to two patterns. Now, these two patterns, energetic projection and energetic absorption, occur in each and every one of us, in everybody. All right, this is part of the human experience. When do we project? We project something with our body language, with our behavior, sometimes also with our words, but most of our projection happens through, let's say, inappropriate communication. Yeah, so if we have a good communication, we can basically say, hey, this is my need, this is what I want, this is what I want from you. Are you okay with this? Do you agree? Now, if we cannot get what we want from the other, or if we don't dare to say it, or if we are too afraid, let's say, to rock the boat, then this mechanism of projection sets in. We are guiding the other person. We are manipulating the other person into a certain direction so that they provide what we want from them, ideally voluntarily, but most of the time this is not voluntarily. It's a form of manipulating them into serving us. This is not necessarily narcissistic. We all do this. If you think of children, think of a 3-year-old that throws a tantrum because it didn't get what it wanted. Okay, that's a form of projection. It throws a tantrum, it's upsetting for everybody else, it's stressful for everybody else, and that stress then leads to the parent trying to cope in some ways, typically by giving the 3-year-old what it wants just so that it stops. Okay, so it's very important that you understand this, that we all project, but when there is a bigger vacuum in you, you project more. When there is trauma in you, or when there are some things that that you were set up to or groomed or conditioned to question within yourself, you will feel more needy. You will externalize your power more and therefore project more. So neediness, emotional projections, and by the way, passive aggressiveness is also a form of emotional projection. Power, the need for power, control, and specialness, or attention and validation, fantasizing, and all kinds of sort of mental movies. Those are mental projections. Those are all signs of something with that unconditional love space within yourself have gone wrong as a child. And that said, I'm not talking, about you being messed up or anything, but I want you guys to understand how much of projection is actually going on in your life, in my life, in everybody's life. Okay, because when you can understand that better, then you can also understand absorption better. How come that you absorb so much energy from other people? Most of you are energetically sensitive. Some of you are empathic. Not all of you are. And just because you're energetically sensitive doesn't mean that you're an empath. So please discern that. Yeah. So there's energetically sensitives out there that are not empathic. Okay. But the more you project, the more you will absorb. So let me ask you here at this moment in the workshop, who of you has this problem with absorbing other people's energies too much? Who of you has that problem? Who feels the energy in a room when you enter the room, the energy of the place, of a building, of, let's say your family or your partner or your children, and feels in some way emotionally impacted by this to the point that it can change your mood or can, change your behavior, your ways of dealing with it? Okay. Yeah, you have a raise your hand button there. I don't know if you see this in your, yes, I got it. Okay, yes. Okay, so this is like half of you. I'm surprised that it's only half of you, because most of you actually suffer from that. Yeah, you suffer from absorbing too much of the energy around you. And
Jona, I noticed this. I don't, maybe sometimes for a long time, I don't think I even noticed that I did it. Like it's like it comes in and you think because you had a conversation with somebody that you're supposed to suddenly be thinking their thoughts or something like that, that it's
yeah.
like this normal thing. But then once I was able to step away from it, although it still really, really happens at a different level, I realized how not normal it is. It's hard to distinguish, I guess, sometimes.
Well, I mean, this is why I'm talking about this here, because it's important that we make ourselves aware of it. So it's very important what you just said, Janet. The problem is that when you're energetically sensitive, you will feel the energy of others. But if you've never trained, or if you've never been told, if you've never been educated on dealing with that, all right, then you will take it as normal. So this is exactly the point that I wanted to establish here, namely that there is a skewed threshold of normalcy, okay, for those of us who are energetically sensitive, but really for all of us, if we were not taught, okay, how to deal with emotions, how to deal with relationships, and how to deal with this exchange that happens there between humans properly, meaning, in the sense that you grew up in a safe environment where you could make mistakes, where you could explore, where you could find your own identity in a non-judgmental, non-punitive way. Yeah, if a child grows up that way, all right, you will find your boundaries, you will find your own values, you will find your own beliefs, and you'll find your own way of seeing yourself. But if you grew up in a way where there were people around you that were, let's say, moody or emotionally unstable, or emotionally, physically, or verbally abusive, or simply not there. Yeah, if you experience certain degrees of neglect or abandonment, what happens is that you've never actually been able to properly discern this. Okay, you were with yourself, and as humans, we are designed to learn through this interaction with our, well, first it is our little family, then it's our little tribe, and then later, it becomes, whatever social environment we choose. But the point here is exactly what you just said. Whether or not you do this to a higher or lower degree, here for our discussion is irrelevant. So we're not judging any of this. I want you to understand this is advanced level, guys. All right. I want you to understand what is going on inside of you and why we're even having this discussion about narcissism. This is the core of it. This is the reason for it. It is because you grew up in a way where, whatever framework that was presented to you did not allow you to form a proper sense of self, a proper sense of knowing the difference between you and the other, which is very important here in our continued discussion, and where you weren't able to express or to explore, okay, how to deal with this correctly. And as a consequence of that, you formed very strong energetic projection and absorption mechanisms. Also, which is very interesting, you formed most of your energetic sensitivity through that, rather unhealthy or, well, let's say not really ideal way of growing up. You had to rely on your ability to read your environment, because your environment, meaning the people in there that's supposed to love you and that is supposed to support and protect you, weren't really able to express themselves properly. And so you had to read them. Yeah, so this is part of, at least from a psychological point of view, why we develop energetic sensitivity most of the time out of the necessity. So any one of us here, and we've already covered this, guys, yeah, adverse childhood experiences. Anyone who has who grew up with alcoholism, addiction, other substance addictions, exposure to very threatening language, or severe loss or separation, absent fathers, absent mothers, or negligence of any sort, lack of self-care, etc. All right, has a tendency to not really knowing those boundaries, right, and thinks it's normal. Yeah, so this is the number one reason why the more of these ACEs, these adverse childhood exposures you have, the more likely you're going to be unable to discern, for example, toxicity in your relationship. So yeah, I won't be able to read all your comments here. It's better if you speak into the microphone, guys. Yeah, so typing long sentences here isn't going to work for this workshop. So please use the microphone. Yeah, so we all know that this part here, yeah, this energetic absorption plays a key role. So now I want to ask you guys what your experiences are in relationships or maybe growing up with narcissism. Who of you has experienced narcissism either in childhood or in subsequent relationships, or both, maybe? Who wants to share? Maybe you're even able to see some patterns here. Yeah, have you noticed that you have had both, for example? Yeah, or maybe that the type of partners that you are attracting, that they resemble either your mother or your father or something.
Hey Jona, how you going? It's Alex here.
Hi there.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good, that's good. I thought I would share my last 2 relationships have been quite heavy in narcissism and manipulation and control. And also it's sort of it's all sort of tied into my father as well.
Okay, so you could see parallels there.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. It's almost you know, it's almost like the same story just keeps sort of playing out. But it's taken me, you know, this long to sort of realize that. And I've been reading a lot of stuff on narcissistic abuse, you know, and people helping people, you know, that have gone through that. And it's just it's a pretty wild energy and thing, because it's very unseen, but it can really, you know, mess you up mentally.
So am I hearing this right? What you're saying is that you have sort of a lifelong story with narcissism in a way, or you just realizing that? I mean, you know, we don't like grow up knowing that we've had a narcissistic parent or a narcissistic boss or partner. We find out, you know, we find it's about the, you know, what you described. That's a typical for most of us, that we have something that reoccurs in our life, and then we start investigating it, we start maybe educating ourselves on it, and then we start seeing things, we start seeing patterns. But is what you're saying that you're seeing patterns in your own life?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, just I would say maybe attracting narcissists, or you know, and or letting them cross those boundaries, you know, and not, you know, and not really understanding what's happening. It's only really until now that I've sort of really started studying into, you know, those things. And I used to have a degree of narcissism. You know, I think, you know, when I was younger, same thing, not knowing. But yeah, definitely, it's the sort of the similar relationships that keep coming in, and now I'm like, no, like as soon as I recognize it, and I'm like, you're not, you know, I'm not engaging in this friendship or you know, personal relationship or whatever. Yeah.
So I mean, this is, you know, narcissism. Let's just define this here real quick. We're in part 5 here of mastering a relationship, so it's already been defined prior, but it's really important to note here that we all have narcissism. Okay, narcissism is not a diagnosis. Okay, we all have narcissistic traits, and they're important. They're linked to our ego, they're linked to our survival, okay, to our physical, emotional, and mental survival. It's a realm. Okay, and psychology speaks of you know, psychopathy, you know, when it goes overboard, the moment when these narcissistic traits take over, when they prevent a person from for example, having friendships, or having lasting relationships, or just simply being able to function in life. Yeah, so that, just like any other, you know, mental health challenge, okay, the moment when it really becomes so dominating in a person's life that they're no longer able to function. Okay, so let's just be clear here that, you know, this, and there's a lot of discussion on the internet, and most of it is really very uneducated, this discussion about narcissism, guys. Yeah, so we all have narcissistic traits, and they're important for our survival. But if they become exploitative, if they become abusive, okay, then they turn into, you know, toxicity. And if this toxicity turns into, like, say, an obsession, or something that you would see in you know, with other mental health issues, okay, where the person can't turn it off, yeah, then we're talking about a true narcissist. And there's different definitions here. There's a, you know, the true diagnosis, narcissistic personality disorder. So personality disorder is very tricky, very complex chapter in psychology, yeah, where, you know, we can have multiple expressions of that. We can have the grandiose, the typical sort of narcissist, you know, that thinks of himself or herself as God and as you know, sort of superhuman. And then we also have the deflated, vulnerable narcissist, who is the opposite, who's the perfect, ideal victim. Yeah, so we got to be very careful here when we talk about these psychological terms. I prefer to talk about the mechanisms underneath that, which allows us a little better to discern, you know, whether we're dealing with someone who has, you know, high level of narcissistic traits or is a narcissist. Yeah, so let's use this in a very conscientious way here. I will make an effort, yeah, to not throw these things around like they're all the same. Yeah, so what you just said, Alex, is quite interesting. You said that you've identified narcissistic traits in you, okay, when you were younger. It's normal to to identify narcissistic traits in us when we're younger. I need to see your hands here. You can't see this, but who of you, now that you're older, now that you're wiser, okay, looking back at your life, okay, to when you were younger, can identify that you had a pretty high level of narcissism, yeah, narcissistic traits when you were younger? And my hand is raised right now. You can't see that. Yeah, so it would be very, very normal, okay, to see this as a wiser and more mature person. Yeah, if you go all the way back to 3 years old, which you can't remember anymore, but you can ask, you know, your parents or siblings or whatever, it's the epitome of narcissism, a 3-year-old. The problem is not that we have narcissistic traits. The problem is the lack of evolution, the lack of maturing of that. So if somebody gets stuck in a 3-year-old or 5-year-old state, or 10-year-old state, or even 14-year-old state, and continues to walk through their life in that state, okay, do you see where I'm going with this? Now you're really dealing with someone who has not had a chance to develop something that, you know, to develop important developmental milestones, okay, to become a mature person, to become a person that is adult and responsible and, you know, conscientious and who can make his or her own choices. So I really need you to understand the depth of that. Yeah, we all have narcissistic traits. We all come from a narcissistic place. And in the course of our, sorry guys for all the noise here in the background, we all develop a more mature and less narcissistic version of ourselves as we are making more experiences, as we are growing up. Yeah. So seen through that lens, yeah, that when we talk about narcissism in relationships, we're talking about, just like when we talk about addiction in relationships, as we already did, we talk about some things that have not developed right in either of the partners or maybe both. Okay, and so you have to look at it through that perspective, that there are things that all of us, yeah, have learned, have developed, have matured in a lesser or higher degree. And when two people come together, yeah, wanting to form a relationship, then we're always dealing with, you know, a discrepancy here. What I mean to say with that is that when two people come together, it's very rare that you have people that have had the exact same circumstances, the exact same experiences, the exact same maturity levels in the same areas. Okay, we'll always have a little bit of friction there, and this is also what really makes relationship interesting, because you know, there's the duality in all of this, and we all have to find out what works the best. So from a naive standpoint, you know, entering into a relationship, we're trying to open ourselves up, we're trying to show the true self that we are, so that we can develop levels of intimacy and levels of love, yeah, that are directly, that are allowing us to directly form a level of intimacy with the other person, yeah, that allows for this fulfillment. The fulfillment depends on the needs and the wants. On a larger scale, we all want the same things. We want happiness, we want peace, we want love, we want validation. So all humans really want the same thing, but not all people try to get it in the same way. The problem with narcissism is that someone who has a very high level of narcissistic traits, or actually suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, will try to get what they want and what they need at all cost, all right? And it's kind of like a parasitic type of bonding that occurs there. It, you know, this person will not really be interested in the other person, in the other person's well-being. The narcissist will be primarily interested in fulfilling their needs, and often also project their needs onto the other person. So now that I called it parasitic, you may ask yourself, well, who would agree with something like that? Who would voluntarily agree to entering a relationship with a narcissist? Anybody else? Has anybody else ever been in a relationship with a narcissist?
This is Jona. I recognized this when we first did these, you did this group now many years ago, which, you know, it shocked me about my family, first of all, and then to see the layers deeper and deeper, deeper, and they're not going away. So I feel like, you know, I'm sure all of us here have a very good study about identifying it, and then accepting our own participation in it as our family, thinking that was normal, and then coming out of that. And that's what I've experienced. Even now, it still just keeps going on and on. And but my experience is more been three things. It's very more subtle, emotional kind of manipulation of doing something that I used to be more entangled with, try to get, I don't know what, they're sucking energy from me. And then in my marriage, it was very subtle. You know, it might have looked smiling good on the outside, but in terms of actually learning my needs and meeting people who had hearts and people having heart energy, that totally shifted my perspective. I don't know what then I could see, I can look back at that moment and see my narcissism, or the way I could participate, because I wasn't always functioning from my heart the way we all can identify it, hopefully now a little bit more. Now I'm experiencing it, just some online dating things, and it all seems very good. But then suddenly, this is what's been boggling my mind, even though it's true. Oh, honey, won't you give me a hug? And it's right on the computer. It's just writing words, but it still has the same effect to me. Like if that person would, after meeting me 3 or 4 or 5 times and is not fulfilling my needs, keeps going, oh, won't you just give me a kiss, or let's have a hug, or, you know, the men suddenly think that they can do that on that side. And then to say something like, I'm not feel comfortable with it, but it's confusing because it's like little emojis and stuff that seems so cute and cartoon, but it's kind of weird, you know, social brainwashing with narcissism or something. So those are my experiences very
So
briefly.
the question was, who would voluntarily participate in that, right? And what I hear you say is that it's often so confusing that you don't even realize how you're getting pulled into this. Is this
Yeah, I mean, the
what you're
family was
saying?
a family. My marriage, I realized it, being wake up, that's what happened. And then now, of course, with this good education and some work, I can notice this happening and can choose to participate with it or not.
So
Yeah.
here on your screen, you see 5 types of narcissism, and like the first sentence here, the best way to avoid being victimized or traumatized by narcissistic behavior and abuse is through understanding narcissism. Okay, so that's what I hear you confirm right now. It's like the more you know about it, the easier it becomes for you to identify it. Maybe not right in that moment, but more and more, right? You're becoming more and more aware of it. And in hindsight, the answer to my question is, at least I don't want to put words into your mouth, but when you participated in it, in this abusive or traumatizing kind of narcissistic type of relationship, you weren't aware of it. Is that what you're saying? I mean, with our
Overall,
families, obviously.
I think the only reason I could come to this education where I am at this very moment with y'all is that there was always a little whisper going, I don't, no words to it, but kind of seeking it, was not feeling, always wanting to kind of escape it, I think, because I definitely went into some escapism things that were, subconscious. But yeah, participating, not knowing directly what it was, so you can't really climb out of it if you don't know what it is or where you are. And then, well, now, like with the dating thing, there's a kind of a social narcissistic norm that has a
I
fine
agree
line.
with you, especially when you grow up that way. So if you've had narcissism or high degrees of narcissism growing up in your home, in your family home, yeah, it is harder for you to identify it. Do we have people here who have already come to the conclusion that they have had narcissistic parents or parents with high degrees of narcissism? I want to add to this that anyone who has had parents with addictions, especially substance addictions, but also high levels of anxiety or depression, would also have experienced forms of narcissism growing up. So substance abuse and mental health issues, anxiety and depression, make people become or show up narcissistic. Yeah, because the normal level of interrelationship behavior sets out. Now, what we call empathy. Okay, so empathy is what ensures a mutual energy exchange between people. It ensures that, we don't do to others what we don't want them to do to us. And when someone is impaired in some ways, through addiction, through depression, anxiety, other mental health issues, or actual, personality disorder, also autism, certain forms of autism, but even TBIs like brain injuries and so forth, can lead to people being distorted or impaired in their empathy. Anybody here identified that they grew up with parents that belong to that cluster? You could also say that an absent parent, like a form of negligence and abandonment, would also fall into this category. It's slightly different, but it would also fall into this category. So that would be like 20% of us. Okay, I'm surprised. I actually thought that this number was much higher. Yeah, so it's roughly 20% of us, 30, 40%, okay, 40% of us who've experienced them growing up at a home with parents who either had mental health issues, addiction issues, or abandonment that led to this exposure, yeah, to narcissistic trauma or victimization. Not necessarily abuse, okay? So abuse would be more in the extreme forms of addictions and mental health issues, personality disorders. All right, so let's look at those narcissistic mind games and manipulation tactics, which may help you to understand narcissism from the perspective of what these patterns are. Okay, so I'm going to just zoom you through the process of what a typical narcissistic relationship looks like. Yeah, how it goes, the pattern, the big pattern, and then we're going to look into those individual techniques, okay, that people who have high levels of narcissistic behavioral traits use. Okay, so there's 4 fundamental phases in a relationship with narcissism. First, it's the enticing stage in which, you know, you kind of been baited into you've been groomed, or you've been baited into the you know, the relationship or the bonding. Okay, then it's the submission to the bonding. There's a fusion and a merging that happens there, that is, from a psychological point of view, going wrong. Okay, it's a form of submission. So in order to engage in that relationship, you have to submit your own sense of self. That's why it's often called submission. Then comes the really trying to break that part in you that is able to look at the relationship, look at, you know, what is actually going on, yeah, your perception, okay, to break that, yeah, to make you doubt yourself, to make you question yourself, to keep you in a continual state of stress so that you're not really able to break free from it. And then the next stage is where, you know, when you are broken, yeah, when you are submitted, when you've given up your own sense of self and you submerged yourself into that shared fantasy that is created through this bonding and merging, yeah, is basically punishing you for no longer, you know, being, you know, this idealized partner that you are. This is something that you see in torture a lot. It's like the torture phase of that relationship. And if the relationship is really extreme, then you will see another stage, and that's the actual destruction. You know, when the narcissist tries to, you know, basically project all its anger and all its inner insecurity onto the victim, just so that they can walk out stronger, and the victim feels, well, like some of you already know, you know, sucked dry, empty. Often also with, you know, their reputation being destroyed, etc. So we have these 5 phases here. Phase number 1 is the enticing. Phase number 2 is the breaking, and then the subsequent submission. Then comes the punishing, and lastly the destruction. Yeah, this sounds very dramatic when you look at it this way, but this is fundamentally how all these narcissistic relationships play out. There's different variations depending on what kind of narcissism you're dealing with. If you're dealing with the grandiose or the deflated, vulnerable narcissist, yeah, if you're dealing with the narcissistic parent, if you're dealing with someone you know, who has experienced a lot of trauma, most narcissists, guys, and this is one of the questions, your questions were really good, that came in, have experienced a lot of trauma and are ultimately the victim of abuse themselves, but they are locked into their own infantile state, that 3-year-old, yeah, and unable to evolve from that. And that leads to a psychological condition where they deflect reality. So they basically stay in that. So yes, you can say that all narcissists are fundamentally victims and, you know, trauma victims themselves. However, you know, that said, you find that with a lot of people who are sociopaths or psychopaths, okay, that they have been severely traumatized in childhood or adolescence. And yet, you know, that's not an excuse really, because there is an element here that obviously we all have to contend with in the course of our life, that, you know, forces us to make choices. And so whether or not somebody turns into a narcissist has a lot to do with the individual setup, okay? You will find out that a lot of people with high levels of childhood trauma also show high levels of narcissistic traits, but if it comes with empathy, then they will mature out of that. If it comes without empathy, and that's the tricky part, then it can develop into psychopathy. So my suggestion to all of you before we go even further into this is that no matter whom you are trying to have a relationship with, that one of the first things that you test is if you are actually dealing with someone who has empathy. You may think that, you know, someone who has a large emotional vocabulary or can express themselves eloquently in regards to love matters, or who can write poems or sing songs about love, is someone who has empathy. But that's actually not the case. So here, tricky question for you guys. How do you know? How can you test if someone has empathy? Any suggestions?
I'll try.
Go ahead.
What about when, like, if I express my needs and the very simple ones, I'm learning, I'm not really a very demanding person. So I
So
know
let's
that,
say I'm tired or I'm hungry or something like that.
oh, I'm tired, I'm hungry, or, oh, if I type this, you know, like, can you not send me this sort of thing because it's costing me extra money, sort of thing. Just like
Mhm.
explain my case. Can we communicate this other way? And then see what happens. So
Mhm.
it's a testing ground to see if the, you know, and it seems like it has to be repeated whether or not the person actually acknowledges it. If they say, oh yeah, I saw what you wrote, I acknowledge what you wrote, or I don't understand why, you know, like actually acknowledge it.
Yes.
Or they
Yeah.
automatically change their behavior or something. There's an acknowledgement of it. That's
It's an
one
yes. That's a very good one, Janet. Okay. So you want an acknowledgement that somebody's actually listening to you, to your needs and your wants.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Now the problem with this sometimes can be that we, and this is something, guys, in Love Integrity, in that relationship course that Jeff and I do, we see this all the time, that most of us actually are pretty bad in expressing our needs and wants. Okay, so no matter how mature you think you are, okay, when it comes to actually communicating this correctly without guesswork or without expecting the other person to be a mind reader, okay, there is a little bit of need for us to brush up on that. Yeah, to brush up on our expression of what we need, what we want. Now, the example that you just did, that you just made, is clear, right? Can you refrain from doing something because, you know, it causes me, you know, whatever, discomfort, money, pain, or so, or, you know, can you give me leeway because I'm tired or because I need a little more space? you know, and so forth. So you're asking, you know, for something, and when the other person listens to it and acknowledges it and follows through with it, that's a good first test. Very simple. Yeah. Am I being heard? Am I being heard? Julianne, come on to the microphone. I can't read what you're typing. It's too much.
Yes, sorry. I was going to say something similar to Janet, and it's like if someone listens and they can reflect back to you that they understood you, and you can actually tell that someone can feel into what you're saying, and they can and you can actually discuss it at a feeling level.
Mm-hmm. At a feeling level. Okay, so how do you know if somebody is actually on a feeling level here with you?
That they're understanding you, that you can actually tell that they're on the same wavelength. Like you can see in someone's eye, and you can tell that they are actually feeling what you're saying, and you know that it's understood.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, they would like be able to feel into it further themselves and see if they like to say something like, let me, well, not reflect back, but is this what I'm hearing you say? And how to work through it. And somebody actually wants to understand you and try to come to a mutual understanding. Whereas in past relationships, I wouldn't have even been game to ask or to say how I felt, but if I did, it would be met with anger and abuse. And
Or
it
deflection.
upsets the other person. They do not want to even consider how you feel.
Or
And,
you're being told that it's wrong how you're feeling. Right?
Yeah, and also mess with my head, like make it out that I'm confused and that it's me, and I would end up feeling very confused and actually question myself and think, oh, hang on, and the pain that causes in the heart, because then I'm questioning myself, who I am, and what have I done wrong? But then the confusion is, but hang on, I haven't done anything wrong, and just being upset and even wanting to try harder, like to help make the person understand me. But
yeah, that's a big one.
And that's an ego thing too. Like, well, that's part of that trauma, is like, if I just explain myself enough, or then you'll understand, you know.
Yeah, those are all issues that occur as a consequence of these mind games and those manipulation tactics. Yeah, so but testing empathy is a big deal, guys, because that's really fundamentally the definition of a narcissist. A narcissist is somebody who's void or has impaired empathy. Okay, yeah, just like how a serial killer has impaired empathy. Okay, so there are certain things that humans can't do unless there's a lack or impaired empathy. Yeah, and that needs to be tested, especially for those of you who've already identified a pattern. Okay, now
I was also going to say, Jona, and if you actually say something that you don't feel threatened, that you're actually able to express something without the other person making you feel threatened or receiving
right. Those are all tests for all these other aspects here that we experience as a consequence of manipulation. But the first thing, before we even go into all these other things, these other manipulation tactics, the first thing is to test the empathy, because the general objective of narcissistic manipulation is to secure, fulfill, justify, reconfirm, and validate the narcissist's needs, desires, views, and their reality as a whole, in order to avoid feeling the empathetic emptiness, lack of sense of self, and deep insecurity that resides within every narcissist. You have to understand that, guys. The object, that would be you, that would be the prey, yeah, the victim, that can deliver or offer them fulfillment of these objectives, is called the narcissistic supply. You are somebody who supplies empathy to someone who cannot feel, who can only feel emptiness and a lack of self or sense of self. So you have to understand what the purpose of narcissistic manipulation is.
So essentially, Jona, if like say, okay, you're talking to somebody, you just met them, and yes, it's in a, I'm going to use this, it's in a situation of, you know, like man and woman relationship thing, and you're getting to know each other, but then we might have one objective for being in that discussion because we haven't really been able to sense whether the person's good for us or not. But they might have a whole other objective that they're either aware of or not aware of, which is then we are, oh, look at, you sound good. You can fill up my space for, you know, every single night on the computer to say, hi, I want a hug. I don't feel right, and I want you to pretend to be my wife or whatever. And maybe, and obviously fear as well. So that's the dynamic. Like we might kind of know what we're doing, but we're coming from a whole different place and thinking that the other person is. So that's sometimes the mistake, is thinking that the other person is there with the same sort of energetic goals.
Oh yeah, I mean,
when they're
you
not.
can't know that at the beginning of a relationship. We never know that, what
Yeah.
the other person's objective is, what the other person's agenda is, what the other person's maturity level is, what
There's
the
no
other person's consciousness level.
transcode little laser we can swipe over it, and it'll go beep,
No,
beep,
there's
beep,
no
beep.
magic and no shortcut. No, you can never know that. Okay, this is part of every relationship, and not just romantic relationship. You know, relationships task is to find the similarities, to find the common goals, to find the levels on which you resonate together, and then there will be levels on which you don't resonate, and those can be either you know, the cause for a lot of friction and conflict, or you know, the cause for, you know, mutual growth. A healthy relationship inspires both partners to grow. It inspires the entire relationship to grow continually. Okay, so if a relationship gets stuck somewhere, okay, and it leads to like one person growing and the other person getting sucked dry, we're talking about a toxic relationship. Okay, because the main objective, namely mutual exchange and mutual growth, doesn't exist. So this is your measuring stick here. Okay, when you get to know somebody, all right, you're gonna have to figure out whether growth is possible or not. Yeah, if I meet someone who's you know, who's addicted to a substance, alcohol or drug or whatever, and hasn't even considered quitting, okay, I'm not going to engage in that relationship simply because, you know, I understand that this person is going to have to go through a whole series of steps in their life, yeah, to sort out their own life and their own relationship with themselves before they're even capable of engaging in a relationship. If I know that somebody just got divorced or just came out of a very, you know, dramatic relationship, and they're in their grieving process, I'm not going to engage in the serious relationship with them until they have sorted out their own stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's not always that people are like all mean and out there to get you. It's that everybody goes through their own stuff, which means we all have our own agendas. And obviously it's the honesty with ourselves and the honesty with the other person, yeah, our alignment to truth, that allows us to figure this out in the beginning phase of the relationship. The problem with relationships with narcissists is that, you know, there are these manipulation tactics that usually already kind of prevent us from testing it right in the beginning. Yes, go ahead, ask questions anytime, please.
Hi, Jona. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I hear
Thank you. Thanks. This has been so helpful. I just have a question. I'm a bit confused in the supply. Can you maybe explain that a little bit more, please? Because I've always just assumed that to be aware of if someone has empathy or not is generally how they treat others, you know, other people, their family, their friends, you know, animals, children. But how does someone lose their empathy, or they just, is it the trauma that they've been through that they just
No, they've never
disconnected
had
that
it.
much from themselves?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you look at it from a clinical standpoint, you could say that. But like I've said, it's the level of a 3-year-old, okay? It's or the level of a 5-year-old. So it doesn't matter how it got there. Okay, the point is that person is not really capable of interacting with humans in a mutual way.
Mature way. Oh,
No,
yeah.
mutual way.
But-
You know, it's not able to have relationships. So yes, you can measure it in the way they treat others, but you got to be careful there. If you're dealing with a full-blown narcissist, okay, they're usually energetically sensitive, which means that they can simulate. Yeah, it's called cognitive empathy. They can simulate how other people feel, okay, because they have experienced it, and they learn like an artificial intelligence. They learn how other people typically react to certain situations.
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost
So-
like a sort of a smart way of navigating through, but it doesn't like align. Actions and words don't align.
Yeah, like a really good, or like the sleazy the car salesman, you know, is really good at reading people, you know, and yet, you know, it's narcissistic. And I mean, the stereotype, we're talking about that stereotype. Yeah, no offense with salespeople, I have a lot of respect for good salespeople. But you know, that what we see as sort of the narcissistic stereotype of salesperson, yeah, will sell a fridge to a penguin. Okay, yeah, we'll sell somebody something that they don't need to fulfill their own needs. Okay, and that's something, you know, it is fundamentally the measure stick here. Yeah,
Is that the
really
supply then?
the needs.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
it's
I'm
the
confused.
supply.
Okay.
Yes, you become the person, you know, that is falling for it, you know, and this is here what you see listed here on the screen are the ways this happens. Okay, there are the ways it happens. This is the way how you being tricked into becoming the supply. Nobody would willingly agree to becoming the supply if they knew that they are supply. The problem
But the
with
thing is, if they're not aware of empathy, then how do they know they need that supply from some way? That's where I'm confused. Like, if
No,
they
it's
don't know it,
because they
how do
don't
they
have
want to
it.
supply for it?
It's because they have no empathy. It's because they have an emptiness there. There's nothing there. It's a hull. There's nothing there. There's no feeling. They need other people, and this is the reason for this externalization that happens in narcissists. They need other people to feel human.
But I
Okay?
think that's what
They need to
what
solicit
people get drawn
emotional
in by.
reactions. Yes, they need to solicit emotional reactions in you, yeah, so that they can sort of like in second hand, okay, experience human notions.
Yeah.
So the whole point of you know, getting, you know, pulled into this, and this is I've done hours and hours and hours explaining all these manipulation tactics. Yeah, you can listen to all these other videos and learn, you know, a little more like how I mean this here. What I've listed is not to become, you know, like good at identifying, you know, how they do it. The part in you that subscribes to it ultimately is the one that you need to become aware of. So the problem with narcissistic relationships is not only the fact that narcissists are really good at these manipulation tactics. The problem is that they're speaking to something in you that ultimately breaks you, makes you to submit to it, yeah, makes you subscribe to it. It makes
Well,
you
it's the need,
become
it's the want to
willing
help.
victim.
Yeah.
And here,
Sorry, yeah,
this is
sorry.
where this is where it goes. Okay, this is the problem with narcissistic relationship. And Janet, you said something earlier that we're kind of finding us in a situation here collectively where narcissism is kind of like state of the art. Our society is narcissistic. Yeah, you get pretty far with narcissism in this society. Yeah, we're living in a toxic society. Yeah, it's toxic for families, it's toxic for relationship, it's toxic for, you know, abundance, it's toxic for spirituality. It's toxic on all levels. Okay, and so in those kind of environments, narcissism thrives. Yeah, because all these aspects of relationships and being human that take a lot of work to figure this out. Okay, they're being circumvented. Yeah, it's dog eats dog on a very sophisticated level. But the problem here is not resolved by us, you know, just sort of generalizing it and vilifying the narcissist. The problem is the investigation of ourselves, how it comes that we keep falling for it. That's the part here that most victims, yeah, of narcissistic and abusive relationships can't make the connection. What in us falls for all of this, guys? What in us? Now, it is pretty sophisticated, the manipulation that narcissistic personality types have. So I don't want anybody to feel bad about having fallen for narcissistic type of relationships. I have been in narcissistic relationships for a good 20 years of my own relationship career. Okay, so it's not something that disqualifies you. It's something that you need to investigate. You need to take this seriously. There are narcissists out there everywhere. Okay, the whole system is narcissistic. So your job is not to, you know, sit there and victimize yourself and complain about, you know, how narcissistic it all is. Your job is to find out what in you subscribes to it. And Mandy, you just nailed it. It's
Jona,
something
sorry,
to
yeah,
do
I
with
just had,
trying to fix others. It has something to
yeah,
do with
but
fix others.
definitely, but I'm trying to figure it out because there's probably two people only in my life that have brought these narcissistic type traits out in me as well, where I've noticed that I'm just not like that. I'm not that version of myself with anybody else except these two particular people that comes to mind first. And I'm thinking, what is it like that I'm like that with them and they like that with me? And we bring out the worst in each other. One of them's my mom, actually. We like petrol and fire. But what's the lesson to take out of it as well? So first of all, why only with certain people? And then second question, like, what is the takeaway lesson from it? Obviously, it's to look at yourself and go, right, what is it in me that I keep buying into this or engaging in it? And what do I need to shift to not be that version of me anymore or not attract that into my life anymore? Like, how do you, yeah, sorry.
Stop apologizing. Start with that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Because it solicits things. It's a projection. Okay. So
Okay.
bringing out the worst of you. Okay. Right here, you're already demonstrating how, you know, there's a sort of a shadow or a shame aspect inside of you. Okay. That is somehow being triggered with this. So if I listen to what you're saying, yeah, and I was a narcissist, it would be very easy for me to manipulate you. Just right here, just through the last comment that you made. Okay. What you need to understand, all of you, is that when you are being subject to these manipulation tactics, which we all are on a collective level, you've seen hopefully my videos on my YouTube channel, the energy talks that I have done about collective gaslighting, collective mind control and manipulation. They're the exact same tactics, okay? We're all subject to it. But what that does to us, okay, is that we're under extreme levels of stress, high levels of cognitive dissonance in us produces very high levels of stress. And when we are under high levels of stress, that brings out the worst in us. Okay, understand that. So it's not the person, yeah, or the government, or the this, or the this. It is the fact that you not realizing that you are under extreme levels of stress, yeah, caused by cognitive dissonances, like a rupture inside of yourself, yeah, a conflict inside of yourself that does not allow you to tune into your heart, to feel the empathy, to feel your own needs and your own wants, and to communicate them, and along with that, the boundaries. So the point of all of this here is obviously to investigate, the story of your relationship and your role in that. But you will not come to a conclusion for as long as you judge yourself based on, what you call the worst of you. It is not the person that brought out the worst in you. It is the stress that brought out the worst in you. Now you got to investigate, why was there so much stress? Why is there so much inner conflict? Why do I have all these cognitive dissonances with that? Because if I'm in peace with myself, yeah, if I'm consolidated with myself, I don't have that problem, right? So another level of testing a relationship is exactly that. Am I in a continual state of questioning myself, questioning my perception, an inner conflict about myself? If you answer that question with yes, it doesn't matter if your partner is a narcissist or not. That's a toxic relationship, because in a relationship, you should not be in that state. Now, can there be conditions that you have with yourself, yeah, that lead to this constant stress? Yes, absolutely. That's your responsibility. It's each and every one's of our responsibility to identify with ourselves the level of congruency that we have. Yeah, the level of truth that we have with ourselves. Or are we living in a false reality here? Are we living in a false self, okay, and try to maintain that false self? Because if we do, we experience high levels of inner stress. I don't know if you guys could follow me here, but the whole point is that you understand that if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what your true beliefs and your true values and your true needs, wants and boundaries are, pretty much anybody can come along and put you into that place that you let go of your own identity.
Jona, just to reflect it back a little bit, I mean, now we saw this little nice, oh, it's gone now, the drawing with all those things listed on it. And in my expert experience that I've had, it's, like one of these tests for empathy. If we have the empathy with ourselves, if we can stand in our own empathy and listen to the other person in empathy, not in judgment, are you narcissistic or not, but if we can sit with a consolidated energy, and then also check in with ourselves, if we're walking around like spiritual beings wanting to fix others and needing attention and not knowing that we want attention from others, all these things are so valid and so precise, like that. If I look at myself and go, oh yeah, okay, I can see where that came in, I can see where that came in. It's very subtle when you think it's normal, but then
it becomes your agenda, right?
Yeah,
that's your agenda.
Precisely. If you go into a relationship with an agenda, you haven't actually had the empathy with yourself and checked in with yourself, like you said, then you become on the same wavelength of that, and then boom, boom. So that's
there's nothing
what
wrong
I'm
with
understanding.
with wanting to support others. There's nothing wrong with, trying to be there for others. There's nothing wrong with wanting you know, validation. There's nothing wrong with sympathizing, okay, if it's appropriate. But if it's there to fill in a void in yourself, if it's there to make you feel better or to sustain your false self-identity, then you're in trouble. Then you become a sitting duck. That's what makes you susceptible. Because guess what? Narcissists are specialized on you. They're specialized on people who are suckers for all these projections here. And the reason why you then subscribe to this, obviously, you know, following this like elaborate list of manipulation tactics, okay, is because you want something from them. So when it comes to that self-investigation, that self-reflection, yeah, what is the story of this relationship and what is my role in it? You got to ask yourself, well, what was it or what is it that you want from them? Is it that you want to continue to be love bombed by them? Is it that you subscribe to this idealized version of you that they projected onto you? Is it that they projected onto you that you're the only one, that you are the one that will make the difference in the world, that you are this yeah, magical person that has changed their life forever? Is that what you want? What do we get out of this relationship? That is the question. It's the whole entire theme throughout the Sacred Self-Healing course, is what is the payoff? If I can identify that something is not good for me, that something is toxic for me, and I keep going back to it, we have to ask ourselves what the payoff is. What does our ego get out of that? And I tell you what it is. It's a false reality. It's a false self. It is an idealized version of ourselves. And narcissists are specialized on projecting that. They put you on a pedestal. They put the relationship on a pedestal. They create a fantasy. They implant that fantasy in you exactly at that place where your sense of self should be. You are merging, you're fusioning with that fantasy of a relationship, with them at the center of it, to a point where you can no longer feel yourself. There is no sense of your own self anymore without that other person. That is your payoff. The shared fantasy, the implanted virtual reality of this idealized relationship. And that idealized relationship has an idealized version of yourself in there. And needless to say that it's impossible to live up to that. So you continually experience yourself as not living up to your own idealized self that the narcissist has produced. And that creates cognitive dissonance in you. That creates this continual stress in you. And that's where all the toxic patterns arise. And as Mandy said earlier, you know, then you experience yourself in your lower self, you know, you experience in the worst of yourself, because now you're under so much stress, you're isolated, you no longer have a sense of self, you have no boundaries anymore, you're constantly being, you know, praised and then slammed, you're constantly being, you know, promised something. Yeah, you're like an addict. Okay, you're running you're being sucked in by this idealized version, this twin soul relationship, this, you know, out of this world energetic connection or whatever magical fantasy of romance you have been implanted. And that is what makes it so hard. And to answer your questions, how do you stop loving someone who is emotionally, verbally used you? Well, okay, frankly, and you're not going to like this answer, you know, going back to someone who has emotionally and verbally abused you is a big red flag in mental health. Okay. Now, if this is in conjunction with a narcissist who is setting everything up so that you would go back to them, you know, because there's a trauma bonding that occurs, yeah, and they produce a lot of guilt and shame in you because you experience yourself in this sort of bad version of yourself continually. Yeah, it's this continual carrot dangle that if you just try harder, like Julianne said earlier, you know, if you could just prove to them how good you are, okay, yeah, you could finally get the validation that you want. Or worse, you know, even, you know, after a breakup, you see this a lot with narcissistic relationships, that you like obsessed with closure. Yeah, you keep going back because you want some kind of closure. Some people also really suffer from that guilt and shame programming that they absorb throughout the narcissistic relationship, because, you know, this false self, yeah, this shared fantasy included you being the savior, you being the healer. Okay, and so if you break up, okay, there's also, this is often unconscious, you know, like an onslaught of guilt and shame that comes over you, because now you're feeling responsible to, you know, what happens to the poor guy or the poor girl, you know, if you leave them, you know, they won't be able to live without you. Can you hear that? That's, you know, still part of that shared fantasy that was
Well, you know,
implanted in
what
you.
happens there too, again, going back to somebody like that, is like to keep going back to the person who's treating you poorly, to try to understand from them why it's not going right. Like keep coming up with, why is this, or what do you think, you know, like just to keep trying different methods to try to get understanding from them why it's so weird.
You want an understanding from them.
Yeah, like you're so caught in the fantasy of it, and you start to not and realize that something's not quite right, and then going to them, I guess, with not knowing that they're being so narcissistic, I guess, or your own naivety or your own, you know, ego needs, and try to understand with them. You're like, oh, can we talk, you know, to try to talk it through with somebody who is
It's an obsession with closure.
motivation is not the same.
No, so the whole aspect of closure is a really big deal with narcissistic abuse. So please go to those videos that I've made about that and narcissistic abuse, because you know, the biggest cognitive dissonance, yeah, the biggest sort of conflict, and with it, you know, extreme levels of energetic stress comes from these tactics, okay, that leave you hanging there, okay, that leave you cliffhanging, yeah, withdrawing the closure. Okay, it keeps you wondering and keeps you in that fantasy that if you only tried this, or if it's that, or maybe it's because they are so traumatized and maybe they need you even more now. Maybe you're letting them down. Okay, they keep you in a constant state of guessing, yeah, cliffhanging. Okay, you know, and you not realizing how you're still caught in that virtual reality. You're feeding that virtual reality by you wanting to have closure. The truth is, you know, if you have already identified that you are a victim of narcissistic abuse, and this is, you know, it's a really complex trauma when you've been in narcissistic relationships, especially if you grew up with a narcissistic parent. That takes professional help to clear this, because it messes with your sense of self at the core of yourself and the core of your ability to perceive reality. So unwillingly, without you realizing it, you're still feeding, the delusion. You're still feeding this shared fantasy, the toxic shared fantasy. And the more you try to get closure from the narcissist, the more you're feeding it. The only way you can find true closure and true healing is by stepping out of it and realizing that whatever the pain is that you're experiencing after having been, discarded, after having been left sucked dry, is not because of that person. It's because of you not being able to let go of this toxic shared fantasy. And the more you try, and this is the reason why we go back, even though we've been hurt, we've been sucked dry, we've been, extorted and exploited. Because we don't realize how it's never been about them. The biggest manipulation that a narcissist does with us, and this has nothing to do with empaths or not, is the implanting of a false reality. And with it, messing with your sense of reality, including your sense of self, which leads to you constantly questioning your sense of self. And the payoff that you have from it lies in that fantasy. You have to decode that. You have to decode the fantasy that you subscribe to. And once you decoded it, you can let it go. You can realize that that's just a really bad movie. So anyone here who keeps going back to the person who hurts them, who hurt them, or created all this pain and abuse in their life, has not yet let go of it. Here, another question: Is it narcissistic of the empath to wanting to heal the narcissist, or were we just delusional? Well, very good question. I think we've already answered that. Yes. So here in the wording, narcissist, empath, it's narcissist and empath are not really adversaries, but clearly because the narcissist has a lack or impaired empathy, there's a little bit of a friction here. So we see this narcissistic or narcissist empath attraction. Okay, they're not the opposite sides of the coin, but they do have an attraction because what the empath has too much, the narcissist needs a supply. And what the empath has too little, namely being in touch with their own needs and wants, being in touch with their own boundaries and goals in life, the narcissist has too much. So there's a symbiosis between narcissists and empaths, which is why this is such a typical constellation. And many of you here, being energetically sensitive and empathic, have the same story because of that. Yeah. What you have too little of, the narcissist has too much of. What the narcissist has too little of or doesn't have, you have too much of. And because you have never learned how to fully manage your own empathy, you fall for the next best thing. The first person who offers you some kind of beautiful, magical fantasy. And you can hear this in my tone of voice that there's criticism in that. Okay, so you cannot resolve the narcissist empath problem here, or the whole topic of narcissistic abuse by just vilifying the narcissist. Okay, most narcissists are actually very open about their agenda. You'd be surprised if you look at the relationships in hindsight. They never really make a big deal out of what they want. It's very clear that it's all about them. The question is, why were you so blindsided that you subscribed to it? And that's because they offered something to you that you wanted. So in that context, yeah, here with narcissism and empath, there is a symbiosis here, and psychology recognizes, you know, narcissism obviously as a as psychopathy, but the counterpart not really. So, you know, empath, yeah, being an empath in psychology is actually seen as a sort of a distortion, okay, like sort of an overexpression of empathy that is in most cases not managed well, which is why, you know, my life's work is about helping energetically sensitives and empaths to manage that better, so that they, you know, don't have to, you know, fall into those stereotypical categories here, like falling for narcissists. Because once you realize that your empathy is partially consequence of, you know, you being surrounded by people who are not actually able to express their emotions and their needs and wants correctly, then you can realize that, you know, this being a good energy reader, okay, is really, you know, just part of a deficiency that you had as a child, and it reminds you, you know, how much more you actually have to take care of your own needs, your own wants, and your own boundaries. Okay, so empathy always comes with an increased need, yeah, to be in touch with your own senses, your body, your needs, your wants, and your boundaries. And narcissists take advantage of you not being able to manage your own empathy correctly, yeah. But again, here the point of this is that you understand that there is a symbiosis that occurs with narcissists, which is why it is such a typical constellation. Yeah, that empaths fall for narcissists, and that's because there's a codependent relationship here. So both the narcissist and the empath are codependents. They live in a externalized sense of self and need the other person, yeah, as the object of that. And agree to, and this is the sad part, you know, as victims of narcissistic abuse, you unknowingly agree to it. You being coerced into that. You agree to that virtual reality, that shared fantasy, that idealized version of yourself and the relationship. And that is what creates the pain in you. So if you have a hard time leaving a narcissist or keep going back, you need to do some soul searching here, because it is not about a person. I can guarantee you that. It's not about the person. It is about the fantasy that you don't want to let go. And here in this question, you know, where it's about the healing aspect that we mentioned earlier, you know, that you want to rescue, that you want to heal the narcissist, the fantasy is that you are indeed the magical healer. You're the one that can heal it all. Here's a question that is also now easier for us to answer. I've been contemplating how traumatized empaths can become narcissists due to not being able to cope with all the feelings and shutting down, and wondering if this is why both sides gravitate towards each other. Yes, it's a void that is created in what the narcissist already comes with the void, and empath comes with too much of it, basically. And then the empath or the narcissistic supply, you know, abuse victim, you know, unknowingly agrees to give all that to the narcissist for, this is the payoff, the shared fantasy. Okay, love can heal it all. I can heal you. I can give this to you. Yes, I'm the one person that you can have this with. Okay, and for the narcissist, that is the fulfillment of their needs. Okay, because now you subscribed to their fantasy, and it fills a void in you, namely the void of being needed, being seen, being heard, being important, being significant somehow.
With like
Blaming
parents,
Mhm.
oh, sorry. Well, especially that last sentence you just said, I'm bringing it around to parents a little bit, and it's just a matter of, as adults, being able to separate, because if the family, like my parents, are still doing things which surprise me, kind of accepting the fact that my going back there or feeling disappointed or being confused or being really angry and wanting to, you know, speak my truth to them, which seems total not productive at this point, is accepting the fact that they're just going to be who they are, and that I've grown out of the fantasy of what I want my family to be, what I wish my parents were like right now, giving up the wishing of what I want from them, and just saying, okay, well, that's what's happening now, and find other parents, or you know what I'm saying?
Yes. No, I can only say yes, 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 yes to all the points.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
You have to accept it. Okay. I mean, you're a grown-up woman. Okay. You're talking about your parents. Okay. This is not a new topic. Okay. This is, you know, it's decade old topic. We all know our parents really well. And, you know, the track record that they're showing, you know, is exactly what they're choosing or how they're choosing to show up in their life. Okay, the fantasy here, the infantile fantasy, and they're calling this infantile not to insult you, Janet, but it is a form of a childlike fantasy, is that they could be different from how
It's
they
like
are.
still bringing up like mini little specks of things in me that are little girl wanting mama to be like
Exactly,
this way and
and that's
dad to be.
exactly what it is, and that's
So it's,
exactly what it is in relationships as well. It's exactly what it is. Okay, it's an infant, it's a naive, infantile, childlike fantasy that one day you're going to get the cookie. One day they're finally going to see how good you are. One day they're finally going to
place would
validate
be
you.
so,
Mhm.
gosh.
It's a fantasy. And you know, the reason why it's worthwhile to look into those manipulation tactics is because they feed that fantasy. They feed it with carrot dangling. Yeah. So there is some aspect here of, you know, where they say, oh yeah, you know, they talk, you know, especially narcissistic parents, they always talk about how good you could have been. Yeah, if you'd only, you know, done this or this or that. Yeah, if you'd only be different from who you are, then you could be the perfect daughter. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Do you hear
Or
that?
they don't
How,
say it,
like,
or they actually don't say it, and
no,
you're
fine.
always not good enough.
Some parents actually have the guts to say it out loud. Okay, to say how you ruined everything and how you should have done what they told you to do. Yeah, and then you would have gotten the carrot. Okay, and some parents, you know, hold this over you. You know, like with, you know, this. You know, like there's still time to turn it around. You know, especially when parents get older, they need to secure supply. You know, in form of you taking care of them. So that's something you see when narcissistic parents age. They really need to secure that there's, you know, one of their children that takes care of their needs, you know, that maybe even moves in and becomes the caretaker. And they use all kinds of tactics, you know, from guilt tripping to passive aggressiveness to carrot dangling. Yeah, it's the oldest mechanism, the oldest toxic mechanism in families in history of mankind. So blaming others out of proportion for some things or for not taking other issues as seriously as needed. So you can see that the questions are not always that concise, but is this a hallmark of a traumatized empath? Let me translate that. Okay, especially here when it comes to parents. Yeah, we've already agreed that it's similar patterns. Yeah, parents, relationships. Yeah, there's a sort of a copy and paste that happens there. But blaming others out of proportion, yes, absolutely. And Janet, you saw that just right now with your parents, your grown-up woman. May I ask how old you are, Janet?
No.
Okay, like give us a
I'm
range, an
joking.
age range.
I'm 54. I'm
Okay,
55.
so you.
In 3 days, it's my birthday. So I'll tell you, but you got to send me a
Oh,
present.
congratulations. Yeah. So you've
Yeah.
known your parents for 55 years, okay?
Some
And
version of them, yeah.
yes, yeah, some version of them, yeah, whatever they projected, okay? And they are who they are, right? I mean, you've come to the conclusion now that this is who they are, yeah, and they've never really been different, okay?
Yeah.
So blaming them for who they are, does that make sense?
No, it doesn't work. It does not work.
It's also actually not fair. You said it, you beautifully said this earlier, you know, or should I just let go of wanting them to be different? Yeah, that's a good idea. So blaming others, yeah, out of proportion, yeah, blaming your parents out of proportion. No, don't get me wrong here. In any of these workshops where we come to the conclusion, you know, that you know, our early caregivers and so forth played a role in how we were set up for life, you know, with our communication, with our ability to express our needs and even feel our needs and so forth. It's a fact, okay? But that doesn't mean that we need to continue blaming them, you know, like latest since our mid-20s, okay, since we were grown-ups, okay, we have had, you know, all the tools with our adverse childhood experiences, okay, all the tools to learn how to take care of our own needs and wants. So for at least half of your life, Janet, I'm just using you as an example because you weren't the one who was asking this question. You know, for at least half your life, you know, your parents weren't responsible for your needs and your wants anymore. So what's the point in blaming them?
So it's
Yeah.
like it's definitely I can identify. It's not like I can mentalize it a lot, but right there when you say it, it's a fantasy. It was still living in a fantasy of what wasn't provided for, what I was looking for, whatever it wasn't filled.
And it's totally okay. It's totally human. It's basically Freud 101. Okay. Yeah. And the blaming, you know, needs to be investigated. Yeah. If we are 15 years old and we are rebelling against our parents, it's age appropriate. But if we're 55 years old, okay, and we go back and we blame everything on our parents, then there are certain developmental milestones that we haven't done.
Well, I mean, I do remember like whatever it was my 20s and 30s going through this, not, well, what you just kind of said with, well,
And
no, it was actually at that point, like 20s and 30s of being able to identify where I was impacted. And I'm sure, hopefully this is, other people have been able to do this too. Oh, this is what your mom did, this is what your dad did, and this is other thing. So then you could start to, and
you
under
begin
this
to
therapy,
understand
it
it.
can
It's,
come out. Yeah,
yes, and
yeah.
it's age appropriate. It's like the 20s to 30s where we begin to see the patterns, where we begin to recognize all this, and it's sort of an intellectual understanding, okay? And then we need to integrate that and realize that, you know, okay, this is, you know, something that you know, it was basically the circumstance of how we came into this life, okay? And now we need to work with this. Now we as grown-ups, you know, have to find our way. It's no, you know, excuse, okay, for not working on ourselves. Everybody has experienced some level of insufficient parenting. Everybody. Yeah.
Well, that
So
what happens then too in our own narcissistic ways, like people becoming, I don't know, they uh, learning this about ourselves, and then I healed this, and then I know that I had a tendency, like the empaths do here, is to take it to my parents and try to heal them and try to sort it out with them, and think
right. It's an
and
external, yes, it's an
move on.
externalization.
It
It's
was
a
like
projection.
still trying to do that.
Yes, you want them to finally see it. Okay, that's you trying to force, that's your agenda. It's you trying to force your fantasy onto them.
Oh yeah,
That's
they
what
got
it
so
is.
mad. They got so angry. They were
Yeah,
angry when I
and
did that.
I mean, okay, blaming out of proportion, whether it's parents or ex-partners, okay, is also entitled. Yeah, it's also a form of entitlement, but it has to do with that fantasy, with that infantile, naive fantasy. Wanting somebody to be different from how they are is our problem. That's literally our problem and not theirs. Expecting somebody to show up in a certain mature, in a certain conscious and empathetic way, that's, you know, our measure stick. That's our value. So I can say, okay, look, I don't want to have a relationship with someone who shows up like you. Okay, all right. Then I choose not to engage in that relationship. The grown-up in me says, okay, you know what? I, you know, don't want to have a relationship like that with someone who shows up like that because it's not according to my values, to my beliefs. And so I choose not to be in a relationship. That's my sort of grown-up choice. So blaming others always deflects from that responsibility. Yeah, blaming is always, you know, the attempt to deflect our own responsibility. And I only have 2 minutes left, so let's get through the last two questions here real quick. How do you get your heart to resonate with your mind, knowing that reality is different to what the heart thinks or feels? The mind is in reality, yet the heart is still stuck in the fantasy. Well, this is a very interesting question because after almost 2 hours here with you guys, we already know that the mind is not in reality. The mind is the one that is in fantasy. The mind is the one that is in the fantasy. So you cannot get your heart to resonate with your fantastical mind. That is what creates the cognitive dissonance. That is what creates the fraction, the fragmentation, and the schism in you. It's the other way around, guys. It is the mind that you cannot trust and your sense of reality because that got messed with. The mind is stuck in reality. Does the narcissist know what they're doing? Yes, typical question, because we somehow want to come to closure. We somehow also trying to like still excuse the narcissist in some ways. Most narcissists know what they're doing. But it doesn't mean the same to them as it means to you. Why? Because they feel completely and 100% entitled to get from you what they need. That's the distorted empathy. So they don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so in case some narcissist, like the full-blown grandiose narcissist, tells it to you, straight-faced, tells you what they want from you. So they know what they're doing. But it doesn't mean the same to them as it means to you. It all comes back to you. You choosing what you're subscribing to. You choosing what you want to fall to, what you want to fall for. Yeah, here the signs of a fantasy bond, mind games, the gaslighting and mind control tactics, the hoovering techniques, how to pull you back in. Yeah, there's lots of videos on my YouTube channel about that. Yeah, here also the energetic and psychosomatic stress that you're experiencing through these cognitive dissonances. Yeah, and signs of unresolved and stored trauma, often as a consequence of narcissistic abuse, but other kinds of abuse as well. All right, guys, I have to run now. We have a session now. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for asking all these questions. I know that it's a little bit of a grind to talk through all this, but I can assure you that this is how the healing process works. And do not question your intelligence, do not question your mind just because you're not getting it the first time around, because these manipulation tactics are pretty sophisticated. Okay, they mess with your sense of reality. And therefore, you're unable to detect these things with your mind alone. You have to work through this in this way, yeah, over and over again until you get it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and see you very soon with part 6 of Mastering Our Relationships.